It was a quiet evening, the kind where the streets felt almost empty. The only sounds were the occasional honk of a passing car and the soft rustling of leaves in the breeze. The streetlights cast long shadows, flickering slightly in the cool, night air. The city seemed peaceful, unaware of the tension about to unfold. Vin Diesel, known for his strength and calm demeanor, was walking down the street after a long day of meetings. His mind was lost in thought, reflecting on the business deals he had just discussed. He wasn't in any hurry, just another ordinary night for him. Despite his fame, tonight he was just a man, taking a stroll through the city. His hands were shoved deep into his jacket pockets as he walked slowly. He'd gotten used to the stares, the whispers, the excitement whenever he appeared in public. But tonight, it felt different. There was a peacefulness to the night that allowed him to forget about the bright lights of Hollywood. He was just a man walking home. But his peace was short-lived. A police car came to a slow stop beside him, its headlights cutting through the dark. Vin glanced up, sensing the car before it even stopped. The officer inside rolled down his window, his eyes scanning Vin with an unusual intensity. "Hey, what are you doing here?" The officer barked, his tone sharp and dismissive. There was something in his voice that made Vin pause. Vin, surprised by the sudden attention, cleared his throat and replied, "Just walking home from a meeting." The officer didn't seem convinced. His gaze flicked over Vin's clothes, his stance, as though sizing him up. His grip tightened on the wheel. "No, I mean, what are you really doing? You don't look like you belong here." Vin's eyebrows furrowed. "I'm just walking, nothing more." The officer's lips curled into a sneer. "I don't like the look of this." He swung open his door, stepping out of the car. The air seemed to grow colder, the tension rising. Vin could feel something wasn't right. The officer didn't just seem suspicious. He seemed angry. His tone was harsh, his words accusatory, and Vin wasn't sure what he had done to provoke such a reaction. He had lived in the spotlight for years, but this felt different. This wasn't about fame or the usual crowd of people asking for photos or autographs. There was real hostility in this encounter. "Hey, what's the problem?" Vin asked, his voice calm but firm. "I haven't done anything wrong." The officer ignored him and took a few steps closer. He pointed the baton in Vin's direction, the cold metal gleaming in the streetlight. "You don't get to ask questions. I get to ask you what you're doing." "Here." His voice was louder now, his anger more palpable. Vin took a cautious step back. "Listen, I'm not looking for trouble, I'm just walking." The officer's face twisted with frustration. He stepped forward again, his baton raised slightly as if to intimidate. "Move along. I don't care who you think you are," the officer snapped. Vin's mind raced. He had dealt with difficult situations before, but this one was different. He had been the subject of attention for years, but this officer wasn't acting like a fan or a follower. He was treating him like a criminal. And what scared Vin the most wasn't the officer's aggression. It was the fact that the officer seemed to be escalating things without reason. The officer's baton swung suddenly, cutting through the air with a sharp whoosh. It was meant to strike, and it was coming directly for Vin. His instincts kicked in. Vin ducked just in time, his heart racing as the baton passed inches above his head. The officer's aggression was clear now, and he wasn't backing down. Vin quickly backed away, putting distance between himself and the officer. His pulse quickened, and the adrenaline surged through him. He could feel the weight of the moment settling in. The crowd that had gathered nearby was silent, watching with bated breath. As Vin backed up, the officer lunged again, this time swinging the baton harder, faster, aiming for Vin's chest. But Vin was faster. He ducked again, narrowly avoiding the strike. The crowd gasped as the baton missed by mere inches, and for a moment, everything seemed to freeze. Vin's mind raced. What had just happened? Why was this officer so aggressive? And why was he attacking Vin of all people? In that brief moment of confusion, everything around them seemed to quiet. Even the sounds of the city faded into the background as Vin's focus narrowed on the officer. He was fast, agile, and sharp, but not enough. Vin knew he couldn't keep avoiding the baton forever. The officer, meanwhile, was breathing heavily, clearly frustrated by Vin's ability to dodge every strike. His face turned red with anger, and his grip on the baton tightened once again. This wasn't just about control anymore. It was personal. The officer's baton swung again, this time aimed for Vin's midsection. But Vin wasn't just dodging anymore. He was preparing. His instincts, honed through years of action scenes, told him to react. His movements were swift and calculated as he sidestepped, avoiding the officer's strike once more. But the officer, now visibly enraged, wasn't backing down. His eyes blazed with anger, his grip tightening around the baton like it was the only thing that could control the situation. The crowd had grown larger now, their phones out, capturing the scene. Some whispered among themselves, unsure of what to make of it, while others stood frozen in disbelief. "Stop!" someone shouted from the crowd, but the officer didn't hear. His focus was solely on Vin, who was still moving with precise agility. "Why are you doing this?" Vin asked, his voice calm but laced with frustration. "I haven't done anything to you." The officer didn't respond. Instead, he advanced again, his baton now swinging at a faster pace. It was clear that this wasn't about questioning or interrogation anymore. It was about exerting control. The officer was no longer thinking clearly, his actions driven by unchecked anger. Vin ducked under the baton once more, his heart pounding. He could feel the weight of the officer's frustration, and the more he avoided the blows, the more aggressive the officer became. This was no longer a simple misunderstanding. It had escalated into something dangerous. For a split second, everything felt like a blur. Vin was focused solely on the officer, moving with incredible speed. But he noticed something, a shift in the officer's stance. The baton was coming down too quickly. Vin had to make a decision. He couldn't just keep dodging forever. If he didn't act, the situation would only get worse. In that brief moment of clarity, Vin moved forward, his body moving instinctively. He didn't strike the officer, he couldn't. But he could use his own strength to disarm the situation. As the officer swung the baton downward again, Vin grabbed his wrist, locking it in place before the baton could hit its target. The crowd fell silent, their collective breath held as Vin held the officer's wrist in a firm but controlled grip. The officer struggled, trying to pull his arm free, but Vin's hold was unyielding. "Enough," Vin said, his voice calm yet commanding. "This isn't you. You don't want to do this." For a moment, everything was still. The officer's breath was heavy and his anger was palpable. But as Vin's words hung in the air, something changed. The officer's tense muscles began to relax. He stopped struggling, his grip on the baton loosening. Vin still had the officer's wrist locked in his grasp, and for a moment it seemed like time had stopped. The officer, a man in his 30s with a hardened face, stood still, his breath shallow as if he was trying to process what was happening. His anger had subsided, replaced by confusion, but the regret was starting to creep in. Vin didn't move, didn't tighten his grip. He kept his voice calm, almost soothing, despite the chaos that had just unfolded. "Let it go," he repeated. "This isn't how you want this to end." For a few seconds, the officer said nothing. His eyes darted from Vin to the crowd, and his hand trembled slightly, still holding onto the baton. It was almost as if he realized, deep down, that he had made a mistake, one he couldn't take back. Then, in a quiet voice that seemed to tremble, with remorse, the officer spoke. I don't know what came over me." Vin's eyes softened and he gently let go of the officer's wrist, taking a small step back. He didn't want to hurt him. He just wanted the officer to regain control of himself. The officer's posture sagged, and he dropped the baton. It clattered to the pavement, the sound of metal hitting concrete echoing in the silence that followed. His shoulders slumped as though the weight of his actions had suddenly caught up with him. He looked at Vin, his face flushed with shame. I don't know why I attacked you," the officer said, almost too quietly for the crowd to hear. "I've never done anything like this before." The crowd, who had been recording the entire confrontation, now watched in stunned silence. No one knew what to say. What was happening here? The situation, which had seemed like it was spiraling out of control, had suddenly taken a dramatic turn. Vin, still calm, took a step closer, his voice understanding. "It happens, man. We all have moments where we lose our cool, but that doesn't have to define who we are." The officer's eyes widened, and for a brief moment the tension between them dissipated. He lowered his head, clearly overwhelmed by the kindness in Vin's words. "I'm sorry. I don't know what came over me," the officer repeated, his voice breaking slightly. Vin nodded, giving him a small, reassuring smile. "It's all right, but next time, take a breath. We all make mistakes, but it's how we deal with them that counts." For the first time since this all began, the officer looked at Vin not with hostility, but with gratitude. It was as if the anger that had clouded his judgment had cleared, and he saw Vin not as a target, but as a person who was helping him understand what he had done. After the officer dropped his baton and apologized, there was a moment of stillness. The crowd watched, their phones now lowered, uncertain of what would happen next. The officer stood there, his face a mixture of shame and confusion. Vin Diesel, surprisingly calm throughout the ordeal, watched him closely. His mind raced. This wasn't the first time he had encountered an overzealous officer. But this situation felt different. The officer wasn't angry or aggressive anymore, but the weight of the moment was still pressing down on him. Vin took a deep breath, considering his next words carefully. He could walk away. He could let the officer deal with the consequences of his actions. But something inside him told him to do more. "What's your name?" Vin asked, breaking the silence. The officer blinked, clearly taken aback. He looked at Vin for a moment before answering, "Officer Dan Marks." Vin nodded. "Well, Officer Marks, I want you to know something. You're not the only one who makes mistakes, but it's what you do next that matters. You can either walk away from this or you can own it. But don't let one moment define who you are." Officer Marks stood silent, his gaze dropping to the ground. The words struck him harder than he expected. He had been a police officer for years, trained to maintain control in chaotic situations. But tonight, he had lost it completely. This wasn't just about attacking a stranger. It was about his own lack of self-control, his failure to handle the situation the right way. Before Officer Marks could respond, another police car screeched to a stop nearby, and two more officers stepped out, walking briskly toward the scene. The tension in the air thickened once again as everyone wondered what would happen next. Vin turned to face the new officers, his calm demeanor still intact. The crowd held its breath, anticipating the next move. Would these officers see this as a threat? Would they support their fellow officer, or would they escalate the situation? As Officer Marks confessed to the crowd and his fellow officers, the tension on the street only increased. People, who moments ago were filming, had now stopped recording, murmuring in disbelief. For a few seconds, everything seemed frozen in time. Vin Diesel stood there, watching Officer Marks, who had stepped forward and admitted his wrongdoings. The crowd, filled with curiosity, watched in stunned silence. It wasn't every day that someone stood up and owned up to their mistakes in front of everyone, especially not a police officer. "I'm sorry," Officer Marks repeated, his voice now filled with genuine regret. "I shouldn't have done that." The two officers who had arrived began whispering among themselves, exchanging concerned glances. They weren't sure how to respond. Should they back up their colleague or take a different approach? It was rare for an officer to admit a mistake so publicly. But as they observed Vin's calm, measured response, something inside them shifted as well. Vin took a step closer to Officer Marks, his voice steady but firm. "What you did wasn't just about me. It's about the trust people place in the uniform you wear. And trust, once broken, is hard to rebuild." Officer Marks nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. He had crossed the line, but in that moment, he also knew that this wasn't the end of his journey. It was the beginning of learning, of taking responsibility, and possibly redemption. As the minutes ticked by, more officers arrived, but it wasn't the arrival of reinforcements that made a difference. It was the shift in the energy on the street. Officer Marks wasn't just a man in uniform anymore. He was someone who was trying to learn from his mistake, trying to make things right. But just as the tension was beginning to settle, an unexpected figure appeared from the shadows. A senior officer, a woman with sharp eyes and a commanding presence, approached the group. She had seen everything from a distance and now stood face to face with Officer Marks and Vin Diesel. "What's going on here?" The senior officer asked, her voice low and serious. Officer Marks, his voice shaking slightly, looked up at her. I attacked him. I don't know what came over me. I've messed up and I'm willing to face the consequences." The senior officer stood silently, her eyes studying Officer Marks and Vin Diesel. For a moment it seemed like time had slowed to a crawl. The air was thick with the weight of what had happened, an unexpected attack, a moment of regret, and now the possibility of a reckoning. Vin Diesel stood tall, but his expression was soft. Despite the previous tension, there was something in his demeanor that suggested he wasn't seeking vengeance. He simply wanted justice, but also understanding. In the brief time he had with Officer Marks, he had seen the officer's regret and his willingness to make things right. "I've seen a lot in my career, but the senior officer finally spoke, her voice steady but filled with authority. "I'm impressed by the way you've handled this, Marks." Officer Marks looked up at her, his face flushed with embarrassment but also a glimmer of hope. "I was wrong. I lost control, and I'm willing to accept whatever comes next." Vin Diesel nodded, his voice calm but strong. "It's not just about facing consequences. It's about making sure something like this doesn't happen again. I'm not here to punish anyone, but I want to make sure we're all accountable for our actions." The senior officer took a deep breath. She turned to the two other officers who had been silent witnesses throughout the ordeal. "Get Officer Marks a report. This will be investigated, but I agree. It's time for him to face his actions. And Vin, I appreciate your patience." Vin gave her a small, respectful nod. "Thank you. That's all anyone really needs. Patience and understanding." The crowd had mostly dispersed, but a few onlookers remained, their eyes glued to the scene unfolding. The senior officer continued speaking to the other officers, but Vin Diesel turned to leave. He had made his point, and he had given Officer Marks a chance at redemption. As he walked down the street, his phone buzzed. A message from his agent popped up, asking if he was ready for the next big movie project. But at that moment, the world of fame and fortune seemed far away. What mattered most to him now was something different, the idea that people could learn from their mistakes, could grow, and could change. And as for Officer Marks, the journey was just beginning. He knew that he would face the consequences of his actions, but he also knew that this moment, this confrontation, had changed him. He had been given a second chance, not just by Vin Diesel, but by the people who expected more from him.